Very soft.
Okay, I'll try to speak louder. Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahana Bhunatu Saha Viryan Karvavahai Tejasvi Navaditamastu Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Let me see. Chapter 2, Shloka 9 is ongoing. I think did we talk about Shreyas and Prayas in detail? I don't think so. So let's do that. If somebody can volunteer to read. Somebody
You
like,
want me to go?
yeah, please go ahead.
Chapter 2. Lord Yama told Nachiketas that there were always two things available to a human being: Shreyas and Preyas.
Sorry.
Shreyas is chosen by one who is wise, a Viveki, whereas everyone else generally chooses Preyas, prosperity and pleasure, Artha and Kama. Dharma also comes under Preyas. Shreyas, on the other hand, is moksha, liberation, the freedom brought about by self knowledge. Nachiketas asked Lord Yama for this Shreyas. Because Shreyas can be used in both a relative and an absolute sense, it is important to know what it was that Arjuna was asking for. Whether Arjuna wanted it or not, Krishna understood Arjuna's request only in terms of absolute Shreyas and not in the ordinary sense. The absolute meaning of Shreyas is absolute fullness. That which is good for me, good for you, good for everyone at any time and place. That which was good for Arjuna was equally good for Duryodhana, if only he had ears for it. If Duryodhana had said to Krishna, I am your Shishya, please teach me, and if Krishna had considered Duryodhana a qualified student, he would have taught him the same way. Whenever and to whomever Shreyas is taught, it is always taught the same way because it is knowledge, jnana. From Krishna's point of view, then the Shreyas Arjuna asked for was this knowledge, which is moksha. In the wake of this knowledge, there is no sorrow. Because this is the teaching of the Gita, from beginning to end, the Gita is Moksha Shastra, a body of teaching meant to destroy shoka, sorrow. Knowledge is something that cannot be personal. Although it has to be gained by a person, any knowledge is always true to the nature of the object of knowledge. It is not something that is centered on your personal will, but on the object of knowledge. For example, if the object is a flower, it is a flower. There is no choice in knowing it as anything other than a flower. If there is something more to know about the flower, then you can know it, its botanical name, which includes its family, and so on. Whatever more you come to know about the flower is always jnana. Because knowledge is always as true as the object, it is not determined by one's will. Therefore, knowledge of a thing is not going to differ from person to person.
Is this part clear? Because it's very important. Knowledge versus will. Any questions?
It seems like different people from different points of perspective would perceive something and interpret it in a different way. Um, if a person is, I don't know, maybe a different point on two people different points on earth may perceive, like, I don't know whether the sunrise or some other fact a little bit differently based on where they are situated.
Yeah. Okay, so that's a great example to analyze. So let's do a deeper dive into uh, knowledge and perspective and perception. Three things will come together, right? So based on one's vantage point, things may appear to be one way to person A and a different way to person B. So that is perspective. Their perception is again governed by the senses, but the shapes their perception, so to speak. So suppose I'm, as you cited the example of the sun. If I'm on planet Earth, if I'm on a beach somewhere, I see the sun rising from the east and setting in the western horizon. And so my perspective is from somebody who's on a planet that's rotating, and therefore I see that the sun appears to go around me with the lack of knowledge that it is I who is rotating. I'm on a rotating body. But now suppose a person knows that they are on a rotating body and they are on that rotating body, it will still not change the perception of the sun going around the earth. The perception will be the same, but now they will be, in a sense, enlightened, right? Like, I
Mhm.
don't really like using that word, but just to put it in quotes, in that now they know that yes, I see something, but it is not that thing which I see. It's reality is different from what I see. In a similar sense, you have a person who's a jnani who still continues to as though, and that as though is the objective, not objective, but it's really the I would say key word over here, that as though in a hyphenated sense is that the whole jagat is as though, the universe is as though. It's not that only my perception about something is as though. Every perception is only as though. So that's the operative word. Um, so the reason if it is as though, it implies mithya, that the jagat is mithya. Okay, we'll come back to the mithyatvam of the jagat. So now suppose you have a person who is in outer space and they see that the earth is rotating, but they are not on that rotating body. For them, the sun neither rises nor sets. It is just another object in the solar system. It's not moving. But if you're on the earth, the sun is moving. So now the question is, who is right? Knowledge here can be decomposed to the vantage point. And in that case, the knowledge holds, but it is not knowledge of the same thing any longer. What a person is talking about when they observe the sun from the earth versus a person who's in outer space looking at the sun is not making a statement about the sun itself, but about its perceived motion. So when a person says that the sun is rising in the east and setting in the west, it is not a statement about the sun, but about the perceived motion of the sun. But if you take away the lensing effect of the atmosphere and the wavelength scattering and whatever, as far as they agree, they will both agree that this is the sun that we are pointing at. That is knowledge that they are making about the body in space that they call the sun. It's an object. So a person can have two different perspectives about the same thing, but what they are actually discussing is not that thing itself, but about something that is extraneous to that thing, which is where they differ. If that helps distill it a little more. So they are not making a statement about the sun, but about its so-called motion. And so that is not the knowledge of the sun any longer, because the sun is the object, not its motion. The motion is an attribute to the sun, because the motion may be there or it may not be there. So it is not intrinsic to the sun. And if it is not intrinsic, it is extrinsic, and therefore it can that Anvaya Vyatireka can take place, right? So therefore it is not fundamental to the discussion of the sun itself.
But um, the motion of the sun also comprises knowledge.
Yes.
But is that not but there is motion of the sun that both these people at different vantage points are observing, but they're not So what is it that is independent of their will here?
So we'll the will part is very divorced from this
Okay.
example. The motion of the sun. So sorry. I lost my train of thought here. Yeah, when we talk about the motion of the sun, it is knowledge. It
Mhm.
is knowledge. Just as saying that the sun is stationary is
Mhm.
also knowledge. That knowledge does not pertain to the sun, but rather to the fact that yes, the sun has a certain motion. If I'm on a rotating object, this is how the sun appears. That the sun appears to be rotating around me when I am on a rotating body itself is knowledge with regards to the perceived motion of the sun. So therefore, that itself is a knowledge. Because based on that knowledge, you can do further calculations. You can figure out when the sun will rise next. You can figure out when it will set next, what its latitude and longitudinal coordinates will be, and the time that it rises and sets. You can do all of those calculations, even if you don't know that the sun does not go around the earth. In fact, even with the perception that the sun goes around the earth, you can do a bunch of useful calculations. Therefore, there is knowledge involved there as well, but that knowledge is specific to the vantage point. And that
Mm.
knowledge is not universal because it does not apply from a different vantage point.
Okay.
So, every knowledge that we have about any object in the world always is knowledge as pertains to only that specific condition or that parameter or that vantage or whatever it is that you want to call it. It is always knowledge which is specific. The more universal the knowledge is, the greater its applicability.
I see.
So, for example, Ptolemy's model, right? The Ptolemaic model where he described the motion of the heavenly bodies as these
Mhm.
spirals within the orbit. And so, mathematically, yes, it explained a lot of things. It explained, the orbiting planets and whatnot. But it it lacked parsimony. It was not a parsimonious model, and because it was not parsimonious model, that means that there was something that they uh, had to fudge in the calculations in order to make it work. But when one comes closer to, and I don't say exact because the exact description of reality is it won't exist with him. But the closer you come, the greater will be the parsimony involved over there. It's like
Mm.
Occam's razor will apply more and more and more until you have a simpler model, because the simplicity is not an expression of ignorance, but the simplicity is an expression of universality. The more simple it is, the more universal it is. E equals mc square is very simple, but it is so universal. Um,
Mm.
and that is where, if we again we are getting a little philosophical and scientific together here. If you think about string theory, you talk about quantum electrodynamics, and you talk about general relativity. And string theory is a supposed bridge that brings these two disparate worlds together. But if you look at the equations of general relativity, they're I don't understand them, right? It will require like several years just to understand the mathematical toolkit. Likewise, if you try to understand string theory, very complicated. Lots of dimensions required. I think you require like 11 dimensions in order for string theory to work. And so somewhere you have to say that okay, maybe they are on track, but it requires further refinement because the universe is likely not as complicated as is made out through these mathematical artifacts. So again, there's a little bit of philosophy and sense of aesthetics involved here as well. So when you look at the motion of the sun from the earth, it is a form of knowledge, but it is very limited in application, and it is limited to that specific vantage, and therefore it lacks universality. Now, if you step away from the earth's motion and you are hovering above the earth and you look at the sun, now you can explain how the orbits and everything else melds together in a more harmonious fashion with simpler equations.
When we say that this knowledge is particular to or specific to the vantage point, how do we connect that fact to knowledge is always as true as the object?
Knowledge is always as true to the object, but then the object, as I would expand upon this example, the object also defines the relationship.
Mm.
The relationship between the seer and the seen that Sangati has to be there, because that vantage point also describes the object. Because what I'm seeing as an object, it is correct. That I'm seeing a moving body across the heavens.
Uh-huh.
So I'm seeing that. And so therefore my description of the earth is correct from where I see it.
So
But
the
what
object here includes both the sun as well as its motion,
the relationship,
a
because
relationship with the motion.
the motion is only, the motion only becomes relevant to the sun when there is somebody who's observing that motion.
Mm.
Otherwise, then there's no motion as regards to the sun, right?
Okay.
Or if you even think about it, like, because this can boggle the mind, because now you think from the standpoint of the solar system itself speeding through, the outer arm of the Milky Way galaxy, and then that's also orbiting the center of the Milky Way. And so now you have another motion to consider. So then which vantage point are we going to look at? Which is the true vantage point? And the fact is that in this Mithya Jagat, there is no absolute vantage point whatsoever. The entire notion of um, absolutism collapses. Because, okay, so, one vantage point is Earth, another vantage point is I'm hovering above the Earth, but I'm still speeding along with the solar system. The third vantage point is maybe I'm in the central the disk of the galaxy, but then the galaxy itself is moving, in the galactic cluster. Then maybe I'm in the centroid of the galactic cluster, but then that cluster is also moving in relation to somebody else or something else. So it's like, what is the true vantage point through which I can describe reality? And the fact is that you can't. All you can do is take a certain vantage point, see how applicable or how universal it is, whether it is, able to solve the problem that you're trying to solve for, or whether it overcomplicates it. And that's all we are here to really, I guess, apply our minds to, which is the application of that vantage point. But as the teaching conveys, the only thing that is absolute, the only vastu, the sad vastu is the self, is the Atma, is Brahman, is Ishvara, and everything else that is Nama Rupa is Mithya. It is uh, a specific knowledge centered on a very specific perspective and vantage point. So knowledge is true, like in the sense that yes, if I look at these spectacles, then yeah, I can say that this is a pair of spectacles. But then, it's like, what exactly makes this a spectacle? Is it the lens? We two monocles together, maybe. If I attach those two, does it become a spectacle? Probably. It's like, what defines a spectacle? Then you get into this whole thing about, like, categorization problems and boundary conditions and whatnot. So, from one vantage point, this is the pair of spectacles. But then, from another vantage point, if I'm a materials engineer, I'd be like, no, I don't see any spectacles per se, but I see like a, plastic frame, and then I see, this thing made of glass, and whatever. And now you're like talking from materials point of view. If you're talking from a physicist point of view, then maybe all you see is atoms, and maybe there's no difference between the frame and the glass, because it's again just protons and electrons and neutrons. So it's like, then what makes this a pair of spectacles is only its utility for somebody to wear, so that it makes reading a lot easier and comfortable. So it's very beautiful, because the knowledge of the thing is not really that thing, but it has a certain vantage point, and therefore you can call it conditional knowledge, and that's the best you can say. The knowledge is conditional, but even that conditional knowledge is true to the thing that this is a pair of spectacles and is not an elephant. And only because I call this a pair of spectacles can I put it to good use. If I don't define that this is a spectacle, then I can't use it as well. And so it wouldn't be true to this object. So knowledge is true to the object in the sense that my will, now coming into the will part, I cannot will for this to be an elephant. This is a spectacle or it is not. It cannot be what I want it to be. I can do what I want to do. I can choose actions per my will, because actions are centered on my purushartha. But knowledge is not centered on my purushartha or my will, because what is, and it will not change according to my whims and fancies.
Okay.
And this is very fundamental in Vedanta, or really not to Vedanta, but it is a fundamental within that is unfolded in this teaching, and particularly something that Pujya Swamiji lays emphasis upon. Because it completely dismisses this notion of, oh, you can get mukti in 4 different ways, right? Like karma yoga and this yoga. And then it's like, no, if you are the self, then there is no action that can arrive at the self. Knowledge cannot be substituted by action. I have to know at a fundamental level what is my swarupa. The self has to shine through in one's buddhi in the form of self knowledge, not in the form of action. Action cannot lead to self knowledge. So karma cannot lead to self knowledge. Then dhyana yoga, those things don't exist. There is only karma yoga. There's only jnana yoga, and those two things lead to separate results. The result of karma yoga is chitta shuddhi. The result of jnana yoga is jnanam, because jnana yoga consists of shravanam, mananam, nidhyasanam. Over here, the anga is mananam and nidhyasanam. The angi, or the primary thing that is supported here, is shravanam. Shravanam dispels self-ignorance, and it dispels self-ignorance without any will involved on my part. So you have something called Vastu Tantram, which is, it is centered on the object itself. This is Vastu Tantram, knowledge. And then you have something called Purusha Tantram, which is centered on my ability to do, not do, do otherwise, etc. So very, very beautiful revelation. It's almost like a, this is a form of revelation, nothing less than that.
Okay.
And what this really leads us to understand at a deeper level is that the universe, this whole jagat, is nothing but relationships. That's all it is. It is relationships between objects and even what we call the subject as the body, mind, sense complex is also an object. But the Atma is not an object. But the body, mind, sense complex, the mind is also an object. So in this Cartesian duality, you have this thing called mind over matter. But we don't accept such a statement, because what we say is mind is also matter. Even the subject is an object. There is no real subject, because the moment you say subject, subject is referenced by the object. There is no subject to speak of without an object to speak of, and vice versa. So the moment I create that dualistic language also of subject versus object, I have created a duality, and what I talk of the subject is not the subject anymore. It is only an object. To go even a little further, what one does through Shravanam is that we have this instrument, this body mind sense complex. It has a certain set of qualifications that enable it to be exposed to the teaching and to have the teaching make sense to oneself. Now, what is this oneself? Are we referring to it as the Atma? Is it the Atma that is learning about the Atma? No, it cannot be the Atma learning about the Atma, because again, that creates a sense of you've created. It's become discrete. There is a knower and known split. So the Atma cannot be learning about the Atma. So who is learning about the Atma? It is the Buddhi, which is enlivened by one's Chitta Swarupa, that as though comes alive, that as though attains sentiency, that as though is conscious itself, and that Buddhi is like the wave that is understanding its own Swarupa, that my underlying truth is that I am water. But in the recognition that the wave is water, the wave does not lose the attribute of the wave any more than the Buddhi stops remaining the Buddhi. But the Buddhi knows that the truth of the Buddhi is not the Buddhi, but the truth of the Buddhi is that which is not the Buddhi, which is the Atma. So the thing that you always point to is always not that thing. It is other than that thing. So would you want to go deeper into that, like that part?
No, I think I get the general gist, Prashantji. Knowledge of a thing is not going to differ from person to person I was just trying to parse that now, right? With all the explanation that you have given, what does that really mean if it's connected to a vantage point, right? I think we need to understand, or at least I'm just trying, and I think it's just like um, a simple kind of parsing in my mind that's not very that's going awry. I just want to get that clarified. Just knowledge of a thing is not going to differ from person to person.
Yes.
Is that because it is not subject to my will, or it is because I don't have, I'm not supposed to have a different vantage point, or is it because the knowledge that is being spoken about here is the like a atma jnana or something like that?
It's the first one, which is, it is not subject to one's will.
Okay.
For example, what is this?
Mhm.
Spectacles. So she'll agree, everybody will agree these are spectacles. But let's say you have somebody from a third
Mhm.
culture or a fourth culture or like a different culture that who has not for some
Not seen
reason
that. Yes.
exposed to spectacles, what they are. And so they'll not have a name for it. But at least their perception will agree.
Okay, I
And
see.
provided that their senses are functional, right? Because knowledge presupposes senses, jnanendriyas. Jnanendriyas nahi hai to then a blind person
Yeah,
will
yeah.
not see this. So this is assuming functional senses. People will agree that this is this thing. I cannot morph it in my mind to be something else. It will always be this thing, even if I don't know what it's called.
Called correct. Okay.
But the vantage point does apply in the sense that what if I show a picture of this and it looks like this.
Hmm.
Doesn't really look like a spectacle now, but then if I hold it like this, it's different. So the vantage point still applies, but what one can say is that if you're looking at it from here, people have to agree that it has a triangular shape. Everybody who's looking at this vantage point will agree to that vantage point. They cannot will this to have a different shape even from this vantage point.
Okay.
So,
Got
so
it.
it's very, very beautiful that way. Now here's it really connects to the Atma Jnana also, indirectly. People cannot objectify the Atma the way you can objectify specs. But people conceptualize the Atma as an abstract entity that they can talk about based on the kernel of truth that is unfolded in the Shastra through the form of, I won't even call it Shravanam, but let's say in the words of the Shastra. Because if Shravanam is there, the clarity has to be there. You see, and provided the mind is ready. Like similar, like I'll get a little deeper here as well. Suppose I am blind. I don't see this. It's not evident to me anymore. Suppose my mind is dysfunctional. And by dysfunction, I mean either I have some form of retardation, or that's an extreme case, or maybe I don't have the necessary preconditions to understand Vedanta. Like, for example, Ambika is very young. So, of course, Adi Shankaracharya was an exception, but she turned 7. She'll not fully grasp what we are talking about at this point. It'll take a while. So that precondition is missing. That's the whole point. Yeah, she's just here for fun, but eventually you'll get it, right? But that's exposure. But but as hopefully, one really hopes that as she gets older and she gets exposed to the teaching, to the language, to the vocabulary, to the nuances of Vedanta, slowly the mind starts getting prepared to the point where now it is a receptacle for the knowledge to take place. Spectacle knowledge takes place, it requires no effort. Vedanta knowledge in a prepared mind takes place. Pujya Swamiji uses this expression very deliberately. Takes place. Knowledge takes place. You don't have to force feed it, or you don't have to stuff it down your throat or into your mind, or somehow keep concentrating upon it. If the mind is prepared enough, knowledge will automatically know, just through mere exposure through Shavanam. What ends up going wrong is at several levels. First is the teaching is not clear. The text is clear because that is the pramana, but the pramana needs to be operated just as my eyes need to be operated. I need to operate my eyes to look around. I can't just keep my lids shut. But if my lids are open, then the pramana is operated, and I need to allow the senses to process in the mind. If the mind does not back the senses, the processing will not take place. And I would even call it processing, right? Because that also implies a certain form of action. Let's say if the mind is not connected to the senses, the knowledge will not take place. So the mind not only has to be connected, which means uh, not distracted, but it also has to be prepared, which means chitta shuddhi. And that chitta shuddhi, if it's there, viveka, vairagya, all of these things, mere exposure of the teaching is enough for the light of knowledge to dawn. Now, suppose what ends up happening is you have different people, you have somebody calls the Atma something. You have Vishishta Dvaita who calls the Atma something else. Dvaitins call the Atma something else. Buddhists call the Atma something else. Jains call the Atma something else. And in Advaita Vedanta, we are exposed to something altogether different. Now it is the same thing people talk about. Can they all be right? Impossible. Right? It's impossible. It's a logical impossibility. Because if everybody says something different about that thing, then it cannot be that thing. But of course, as we talk about Pramana Vakya and we talk about the teachings of Adi Shankaracharya, it is at least very obvious to me that every other interpretation is faulty at best and extremely misleading to and derailing to one's purpose in life to acquire self-knowledge. So if Vedanta teaches the self as the whole, then that has to be the only truth and the only way to see it. Any other way of seeing it is a defect. It is a defect in one's mind and it's a defect in one's teaching. And therefore, the knowledge of that which we think we are learning, the knowledge cannot be gained. Because it's not only about a vantage point at this point, even the object that we're talking about, the sun, we're not even calling it the sun. We're calling it something else. We're calling it cheese. So this is where we often go wrong. And even in the knowledge of the self, there is no will involved. All you require is a teacher who belongs to a sampradaya who can unfold the teachings in the manner in which it is meant to be unfolded and not theorized or conceptualized. Because every concept is mithya jnanam. I don't mean mithya jnanam in the sense of even having relative utility. It is wrong altogether. It is like calling an apple a banana. It has no utility. Okay. So, but I mean, like this thing itself is thesis worthy. Like somebody can write a whole paper and it'll still not be enough. Any questions, thoughts here before we proceed? Okay. So relative shreyas. What do we need?
Usually, what is good for you at a given time may not be good for you at another time. For example, a particular drug may be a cure for your illness, although it is also a poison. Thus, what is good for you at one time is not good for you at another time. Also, a certain medicine may be good for only one problem and not any other. Alternatively, the drug that treats your problem may not be good for someone else with the same problem because of the other person's allergic reaction to it. This kind of goodness is what is meant by relative goodness, something that is not always applicable in the same way. It keeps on changing. Something that is good is determined by place, desha, time, kala, and situation, nimitta. Even ethics and values, Dharma Shastra, which we generally consider as absolute, have to be interpreted from time to time. Because Dharma Shastra is to be interpreted, it cannot be considered absolutely good.
Does this make sense? So Dharma Shastras will also give you this Desh Kala Vastu sort of thing, right? In this situation, you do this, but that doing this in that situation may not be applicable to everybody either. Or another example would be even if you talk about karma kanda, the putra kameshti yajna. If you want to have children, do this yajna. You can't go and make the recommendation to a sannyasi, right? Or to somebody who's like 80 years or 90 years old. You can't do that. Doesn't make sense. So that which is good at all times to all people, and not just I would argue for all people, but for basically every creature that is out there in the world, that alone is Shreyas. There can't be any exception to it. And what is Shreyas here? We'll find out, but it's freedom. Um, I wanted to go because we sort of talked at length about this thing about knowledge and about the universe and objects and relationships and vantage points and whatnot. I thought, I'll just give a few perspectives on how I view. Just again, this is also my perspective, but I think it is consistent with the Shastra. Like how I see the Jagat and its relationship to the whole. So, you know, there's this discussion I was having with one scholar, and there was a quote somewhere that math gave birth to the universe, and I shared that thing in WhatsApp as well. Like if you guys see that, and the thing is that when we talk about mathematics, also it only defines relationships between mathematical objects. Right? So if you have whether you talk about variables or you talk about numbers or constants or whatever it is, by itself it means nothing except in relationship to something else. All of mathematics is nothing but a fact, like a fact table of some, not really a table, but it's relationships. It's defining uh, constraints, it's defining parameters, etc. But it doesn't do anything by itself. So, if you look at the Pythagorean view, like how Pythagoras said that there's this ideal, I don't know exactly, it's idealism it's called, maybe, I forget, I don't know. But there's a form of philosophy which says that, you have the world of names and forms, but then you also have a conceptual universe underneath, which is really mathematics. I think that's even something that Plato believed in, right? With the cave allegory. There's this whole philosophical allegory of the cave, where you see shadows moving across the wall of the cave, but that's not really the thing that's happening. Or another way to put it in modern parlance, people say the map is not the territory. The map is only an indication of the territory, but there's something like deeper than just the map itself, right? So again, maybe that's not the best example. So, what a lot of atheistic philosophers and philosophies really posit is that the universe can come about by itself. It does not require an intelligent agent, and I think that is absolute balderdash. It's meaningless. It is philosophically flawed, and it is a greater leap of faith to believe that the universe came about by itself than it is to accept that there is Ishvara. Ishvara is a lesser leap of faith and a much more reasonable proposition and hypothesis, in my view, for several reasons, right? So first is that okay, suppose let's say that, you're just pushing the problem back one layer. Suppose we say that the universe came about, and there is this universe. Where did it come from? The simple, straightforward answer is that okay, everything is from Ishvara. Very simple answer. But now, if you have to dismiss with the notion of Ishvara, you'll try to come up with an answer such as, oh, maybe this universe is part of a larger tapestry of reality which you call the multiverse. So this is one universe, and there have been lots of other universes such as this. This came and this went, but there's something more fundamental. Let's call that a multiverse, like a higher dimensional sort of cosmic playground. Okay, that only begs the question, right? Where did that come from? And then you can't say, oh, even a greater hyperverse. Like, let's go back one more step, because then again, that becomes an infinite regress. Doesn't make sense. So this whole multiverse thing you might have heard of. I think maybe Shikaji, you might be aware of it. Like this whole quantum idea of how every single observation spawns a new universe. So there's this whole many worlds hypothesis that was put forward 50, 60 years back, something. It's not very compelling. What all that one has done is created a lack of parsimony over here. That first of all, you complicated Jagat by adding multiple layers to it. Plus, you can't explain where that hyper layer or that hyperstructure really came from either. So again, it goes back to okay, where does the multiverse come from? It begs the question, Ishwar. That's the answer. Okay, so we take another idea. Maybe what's happening is this universe has always been there. If this universe has always been there, it doesn't explain uh, decay. We see that there is something called entropy. Entropy is a very unavoidable, inescapable fact of nature. You cannot reduce entropy. Since the very time that the Jagat really took form, entropy has only been increasing, increasing, increasing. And so, if you imagine a time that's infinitely back in the past, if this universe were infinitely present, that would imply uh, a state of low entropy which goes less than zero. If you just extrapolate, right? Just you talk about the Big Bang model or whatever. So again, like that doesn't make sense, and I have to refine my own models over here. But I'm just trying to find out ways in which to dismiss some of these ideas about the universe. One second, Pachi. Okay. So then the third idea that people have is ki, okay, maybe the universe is always there, but what we see, what we interact with as physical objects, have a mathematical construct that's underneath. Now, then that begs even a greater question. Who penned the mathematical relationships that take grosser form, the form of the physical universe? Because if we describe the universe only in the form of relationships, the relationship has to be defined. Today, if you, I don't know if anybody's worked with data, but if you're joining two different tables, what do you have to define? You have to define what the join condition is, right? Join on A dot this equals B dot that. Right? You have to define a join condition. So every relationship is an equation of sorts, and you have to equate things together. And to equate things together, you need somebody to define what that equation is, or what the parameters of the universe are, what the constants of the universe are, etc. Again, no, this is not a very reasonable solution either. But what I would say is Advaita Vedanta has made this very clean. Even there are other traditions within Sanatana Dharma which are Advaitic in nature, such as Kashmiri Shaivism or the Shakta philosophers who also talk about Ishvara as the whole, right? Like, Sarvam Shivoham, all that there, everything is there, and that Shiva, that I am. I am Shiva, there's nothing other than Kashmiri Shaivism also accepts that. But what they do is they also define different uh, uh, tattvas, 36 tattvas, 28 tattvas, there are different layers that they describe to reality. And that's also fine because the world that we are a part of is a complex world, it's a many layered world. And so, therefore, of course, you will have multiple uh, ways in which you can describe things from gross all the way to subtle, which all the way goes back to Bhagavan. But what Advaita has done is genius in its scope because it only talks about the Jagat as though, and it uses the Pujya Swamiji, I think, pointed out that Shankaracharya ji, Adi Shankaracharya ji, uses the word eva. Am I using the right expression? Eva, like as though. It's not the eva, right? Huh? Eva. So
Yeah,
that
Eva.
he's using that in his commentaries over and over to condition us to not take the world as absolute, but eva, as though real, not real. And he does not get into this multiple tattvas and this and that and all. He gets right to the thing that this whole jagat of names and forms is Maya Rupa. It is in a constant state of flux. You can never, ever, ever fully grasp it. You can't. I can't. Nobody can. But it has its basis in Ishvara and Brahman. And it takes you back so effortlessly to the truth that every single Vivekaha that we have, Panchakosha Vivekaha, you have Avasthatraya Vivekaha, you've heard of all of this in Tattvabodha. All of these Vivekas have a certain depth of field to them. When you look at the world through the scientific lens, it is distributed and flat. It is flat. It does not ever point towards the source. What do I mean by that? You talk about the periodic table. It's flat, right? So it's in fact it's a flat table. You talk about hydrogen, you talk about oxygen, you talk about helium, copper. They all share the same degree of reality in terms of grossness. And I don't mean grossness by size. I mean in terms of tattva. But now when you talk about the pancha koshas, from uh, Prithvi all the way to Akasha, do you see the subtlety, the depth, not the width, but the depth? Not only does it describe the Jagat through five elements, but it describes the Jagat also in layers of depth from gross to subtle. And that makes it easier for the mind to meditate and go back into Brahman, into the self, into the cause. Because it's going from effect into the cause, from the gross to the subtlest. As the Upanishad says, smaller than the smallest, larger than the largest, the self. And you talk about Avastha from Jagrat to Sapna to Shushupti, right? Then again, there also you see there's a subtlety involved. You talk about any of these Vivekas, from Drishya Viveka, you start with the object, you look at a tree, you look at spectacles, then ultimately you get to the level of the thought, and then even subtler than that, the witness and all. So Vedanta alone makes this palpable, and Adi Shankaracharya has brought this out so beautifully that his one agenda was to ensure that every seeker of truth has the smallest possible distance to traverse to get from the seeking to the sought. He made it so effortless, and there was so much parsimony. And there is this Occam's razor idea already built into the teaching tradition of Advaita Vedanta, where it does not waste words and it does not waste time to get you to see the vision. It does not get you lost in the world of names and forms and different layers, but it skips right to the truth. It's astounding when you think about it that way. And this is only possible. You can only explain the experiential world with Ishvara. If there is no Ishvara, the world can never be explained. And if the world cannot be explained, the mind can never ever grasp the truth of the self. Because you will faced with so many contradictions that it'll just be a matter of belief, never knowledge. But the self is a matter of knowledge, not just mere belief. And to understand it, one has to have some relative understanding of the way the world works. Really. So yeah, that's it. Okay. So, any questions on this? I know this was a really dense session, but I think it was worth it.
So, Prashantji, maybe next session, what you can do is, can you explain when you said that the way Buddhism or Jainism or Advaita explains about self, it's different? Because from what I have learned and what I can see is basically the Advaita, Buddhism, and Jainism, they all point towards the self in a very similar way. And what you call the universe and the Ishvara is basically the same.
I can guarantee you that that is not true. I can absolutely guarantee that, because both Jain Darshana and Bauddha Darshana are Nireshwara. First of all, they don't even accept Ishvara.
So my understanding was exactly the same, that they both are very similar, but when you talk about Advaita and when you talk about Ishvara, that Ishvara created this, isn't it whatever it is Ishvara? He is not the creator, but what it is Ishvara.
It's both, because you need Ichha Shakti, Jnana Shakti, Kriya Shakti in order for even the relationships which are defined to have life breathed into them and to come alive. And so that initial impulse, the prime mover, without that prime impulse, without Ishvara, the universe would not even come about. So what is Ishvara? Ishvara is both the material of the Jagat, but also the Nimitta Karanam of the Jagat. So Upadana Karanam and Nimitta Karanam, which is the cause, the efficient cause. Ishvara willed the Jagat into existence. The same way, the Shastras describe the Vedas as an effortless outpouring of Ishvara's breath, which becomes the blueprint of, to understand the cosmos as well. And so it is Ishvara's vritti or Ishvara's thought that has manifested in the form of the whole Jagat. And then that requires that impulse. And so that Maya Shakti, without that Shakti, the Jagat would not be in motion and it would not exist. It would not come into existence. It requires that initial Spandanam. And that Spandanam requires a conscious being, a conscious agent, an intelligence that is able to pervade and breathe life into. So, I'm being very clinical here, but honestly, Buddhism and Jainism uh, and Advaita, none of these can be reconciled at the level of philosophy. They are as different as day and night. I would go so far as arguing that there is more in common that Saeshwaravad has with the Abrahamic traditions in terms of understanding the fundamental nature of reality than it does with Jainism and Buddhism, because these are essentially Nireshwara. Like, for example, if you see,
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. That in Advaita, and I listened to Acharya Prashant, right? Have you heard about him? So
I mean, I've heard about him, but I don't look into that much.
okay, so he teaches Vedanta also, and for him, his interpretation is very similar to what the Buddhism and Jainism are saying, that there is no God, there's no creator, and there is not ever a start or an end to the universe. It is
Then I
just
would
changing.
say he's wrong. He's wrong as per the teachings of the Shastras. The Shastras are very, very unequivocal and clear that there is Ishvara. Like, every single one of the Upanishads scream with Ishvaravada. You talk about the Puranas, it's all about, avatars of Ishvara. You talk about the Bhagavad Gita, there again, Krishna presents himself as Bhagwan. The Mahabharata, Ramayana, Avatarvad. So the entire corpus of Vedic teachings is replete with references to Ishvara. So that is one thing. So on that, this Acharya is faulty in his understanding. Second is, there's a lot more common that Hindus have with Jains when it comes to culture, when it comes to ethics, when it comes to practices and language. Because most Jains are Gujaratis and Marwadis, and the most vegetarian Hindus in India are also not by coincidence Gujaratis and Marwadis, because of that close cultural connection that Hindus and Jains have had in Gujarat and Rajasthan. But aside from those cultural, food, culinary practices, language, things like that, the philosophies are absolutely different. The understanding of karma that Jains have is totally different from the understanding that Buddhists have, is totally different from the understanding that the Hindus have. Karma is defined in Jainism as a pudgal. It is a substance that sticks to the Atma as one performs actions. Whereas in Vedanta and Shastra, in the Vedas, one says that the Atma is asangaha. Nothing can stick to it, much less can karma. Secondly, doesn't suggest that karma are these microscopic particles that stick to the self. So that's what Jainism says. In the Vedas, one talks about karma as a record that is recorded. It's like a form of knowledge that is stored that becomes a cause for future actions or future births or future consequences. So it's almost like a cause that is crystallized, then it spawns into an effect, and doesn't speak of it in terms of like particles and all. Another thing is that in Jainism they talk about Nava Tattvas. So you have 9 different substances which are each equally fundamental in nature, which means that they are irreducible. They cannot be reduced to any more basic substance. I think they talk about Jiva, Ajiva, Dharmastikaya, Adharmastikaya, the Kal, and then the space, Akash, and then there are 2 more. No, 3 more. I remember. But you have these 9 fundamentals which are irreducible. In the Vedas, we talk about the fact that the Jagat is mithya. It is absolutely reducible. In fact, there is nothing, including space, which is not reducible, including time, which is not reducible. It is all reducible. There is nothing which is not reducible, and all that it reduces down to is, Ishvara. And then, you take the Swarupa of Ishvara, and that is the Atma. And so that irreducibility is inherent to the philosophy of Jainism, which says that there are these 9 fundamentals which you cannot change, and they will always be permanent, and they will never ever transform from something gross to subtle. Buddhism has other flavors. It gets a little more complex over there, but Buddhism basically has Shunyavada and Madhyamika Buddhism and Theravada Buddhism, and then there's one tantric form of Buddhism also. which I would say is relatively closer in practice to the Hindu teachings, but the other forms of Buddhism are not so close. The Tantric Buddhists were highly influenced by the Tantric teachings of Sanatana Dharma, and so they are also into things such as Devi worship and into Siddhi cultivation and many other things. But again, at a fundamental level of like what is the self, the Buddhists deny the existence of the self. The Jainas suggest that there are infinite Atmas. The Hindus say there is nothing other than the self, it is Ekam Advityam. And so there are so many distances and differences between the teachings that anybody who tries to compile them together is doing an injustice to all of the traditions, because at a surface level, if one has not studied these at depth, it might look like ha sab kuch ek hi, everything looks similar. But as you start, scratching the surface, you'll begin to see so many dissimilarities which will not be reconciled together. Another difference is again in this whole thing of the Atma. According to Jainism, when we talk about the Atma and moksha, even the word, the expression is the same. The teaching is completely different. And my understanding is that, of course, Jain tradition evolved and came into being rather much after the Vedic teachings. And therefore, obviously, given that they were all living together in the same geographical region, Bharatvarsha, these concepts, these vocabularies were borrowed, and then they were digested, and then they were recast in a completely different mold, such that the shabdas were the same, but the underlying mithas were vastly different from one another. And so, for example, what in Jains, the way to attain moksha is by cleansing the Atma of the karma pudgala that sticks to one, and that is done through the form of nirjara, right? So you have three types of karmas over there. You have shubh, you have ashubh, and then you have shuddh. And the shuddh karmas don't add to the karmic imprint, but it rather starts, washing away and scrubbing away the karmas, such that they start falling away from the self that's defined in Jainism. In Advaita, we don't talk about this at all, because the karmas don't have any relationship to the self, because the karmas are mithya, the self is satyam. In fact, the truth of the karmas itself is the self. And so there's no question of the self being as though even covered. And so, so the way to moksha and Jainism is through this karmas that you do, shuddha karma, to remove the influence of the karmas, such that there's no more karma, and then enlightenment is gained. Then what happens to the Atma that they define in Jainism is that after this purification has happened, the Atma rises to the top of the cosmic, I guess, the universe, whatever that figure is defined like this. I don't know how but it looks like this, right? And it rises to the top. And all of the Atmas are like these light particles which all reside at the top of the cosmos. So again, what happens is it has turned the Atma into an object, which it treats as an object, because it says that it is one of the 9 fundamental substances, Jiva, Ajiva. So Jiva is as fundamental as the Ajiva, and the Jiva has a very subtle nature, and it rises to the top of the universe upon moksha. So Jainism says that all the liberated beings who have attained liberation thus far, including the Tirthankaras, have all risen to the top of this universe. And then they are all there as permanent beings, but liberated beings. It's completely fundamentally different, because here we say that the Atma is not a thing at all. It is the only thing that cannot be attributed any quality, and it is the truth of it all. It is the truth of all substances, but it is not a substance in itself. It is a substantive, but not an object. And it is not even the subject, but it is the truth of both the subject and the object, both the jnata and the jnanam, and the jnaya. And that is the Atma, which is the truth of the Lord. So again, like, I've not heard these other acharyas. Personally, if you ask my very candid take, I'm typically allergic to any reconciliations between traditions which they try to create compatibility on basis of false grounds. It helps in culture, because we all have Jain friends and Hindu friends, and people can get along together, but it does not make it philosophically compatible or true. And so I always keep that distinction in mind. And only one can be true.
Prashantji, can we say that at a Vyavaharika level, there is more samya, more commonality and similarity because of the Kala and Desha, your day-to-day interactions and engagement? It helps when we, I guess, try to equalize it with action. But at a Paramarthika level, it is very different. Is that the right way to think about it?
not only at a Paramathika level, but Vyavahara also includes the different layers of reality. Right? It's not just Vyavahara is not just me going to somebody's place to eat food, but Vyavahara also includes the different levels of reality. You talk about Hiranyagarbha, you talk about Ishvara, you talk about Mana, Buddhi, Ahankara, and all of these things. These
So
are
the
all
karma kanda part varies across all these different cultures. Then,
not just the Karma Kanda, but
mm.
the fundamental ontology itself differs.
Okay.
So not only the ontology at the Paramathika, but the ontology at the Vyavaharika also.
Hmm.
For example, the fundamental ontology at Vyavaharika is Maya. But then again, like I was mentioning in Vedanta, it's reducible to something more and more fundamental, whereas in Jainism it is purely static. It's not reducible to something more fundamental because they teach each or they treat each substance as individually real and irreducible. And like that, there are 9 irreducible substances like space and time and movement and stillness.
So that will influence the rituals then.
It will influence the understanding of nature, and so the understanding of nature is totally different, and the rituals may or may not influence, right? So for example, I would like I said, at a personal level, I would feel a lot more comfortable to be surrounded in a building with Jain neighbors than with somebody from West Bengal Hindu eating like machi bhat. Just at a fundamental level, like my kids can play with I've eaten dal bati at my Jain friends' place. Not I have half of my friends are Jain. I have more, in fact, probably more than that. And so, at a cultural level, at a bonding level, at a linguistic level, there is so much in common. But the thing is that most of these people that I grew up with never spoke about philosophy to that depth. But once you scratch the philosophical surface, you find that, okay, what we have in common is culture, not philosophy, and not adhyatma for sure. And philosophy has different layers, and at each of these layers, there's incompatibility. But again, if you go to a Derasar, where Jains go to worship, and if you go to a Hindu mandir, you'll find that there are many similarities. You light a diya, you'll have the swastika, you'll apply tilakam on the different tirthankas, you'll do pujas, you'll sing stotrams, you'll sing stutis, and this all evolved because of the cultural milieu that was shared. But what is being ultimately worshipped, the underlying truth, beneath the forms, is where the difference is so stark that I would say, probably they are two of the most incompatible Indian philosophies. There's probably more in common between Vedanta and certain forms of Buddhism than there is between Vedanta and Jainism, and there's probably more in common with Thomistic versions of Christianity with Sanatana Dharma than with Jainism. So I don't know if you heard of Thomas Aquinas. You
Yes.
have heard of him. Again, he if you take away this whole rubbish about Jesus and him being the savior and the Son of God, and you take away that whole thing, and you just focus on the argument for God's existence, that's very compatible. They talk about the prime mover.
That's what I was trying to tell you, because I am learning also from another Jain teacher who um, teaches the original pure, just the teaching, not all the rituals and the traditions. Because if you go ancient times when Mahavira was there and his teachings, it is all kind of mellowed down, and what has come out is not totally what he taught. So when I'm learning all these different things, it can really, I can reconcile and see there are minute differences, but the underlying thing is, I feel it is the same, the way I relate to it. um, but I would love to know your take on the major differences, if you have time and if you can discuss that maybe.
Sure. Yeah, this is to say one thing that, like, I see it as the very opposite, which is there are minute similarities and there are irreconcilable differences. And I say this because for 2 years in my teenage life, I seriously studied Jain Shastras, Sutra, and there were several other sutras, which are fundamental Jain texts, like the basic teachings, the very core teachings. There's a Bhagavati Sutra, or there are like different scriptures of this sort, and these are the places where the fundamentals are defined, and the fundamentals themselves differ. So I think, and again, like, I don't want to discourage it from, or put it rude way, but I think the attempt to reconcile two very different things might create some sort of cognitive dissonance. And that cognitive dissonance is what, because there is an attachment to both, right? And there might be a desire to reconcile them together. And what I'm saying is that it would be an abortive effort, because you stretch it out for a longer period, and at some point, I can guarantee you, if you do a deep enough study of the Jain scriptures and the Hindu scriptures, there's no way that they can come together, except at the cultural level where we share a lot of traditions, but not at the fundamental level. The fundamentals are so off that they can't come together. So I mean, that's the extent of what I can speak on this, because it would not be profitable to others to go into the deeper details, but we can do that separately. But yeah, I would say that, and I will say that out of compassion as opposed to like being rude or anything. But if you find that, just think about whether there's any cognitive dissonance at play over here because of some family attachment or growing up in a certain tradition. It
It
could.
is just the inquisitiveness, and they both talk, like I do the Vipassana meditation, and also in Jainism they focus a lot on meditation, which is their main way of purifying and contemplating. And even I think to a largest extent in Vedanta, the more you meditate and the more deeper you go and try to learn yourself, the truth is going to be more and more evident. That's what my experience with meditation is. But yeah, I mean, I don't know why, but I enjoy all these three types of classes which I have, and I feel that they merge at some point.
Yeah. I mean, I would. I'm glad it's working for you. I mean, that's good. Yeah.
Okay.
I don't see it the same way, but yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so this was a good session. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Avashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om Shri Guru Bhyo Namaha. Hari Om. Om.
Thank you. Hari Om.
Hari Om.